Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take your source material and, well, turn it into something you can really sink your teeth into.
And today that is quite little.
It is. We've looked at everything from monetary policy to, I think, deep-sea bacteria once. But today, the source you sent us is a recipe.
And it is not just any recipe. We're looking at something called the algae and veggie boil, Old Bay miso recipe. And just reading the title, you know you're in for something interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, this isn't just a set of instructions. It feels more like a culinary thesis. It's a master class in layering textures, in substituting ingredients in a really clever way. And I think the audacious act of blending the American East Coast's signature spice with, the foundational umami of Japanese cooking.
It's a flavor architecture. That's what it is.
It really is.
So our mission today is to unpack this. We're going to explore how a classic American tradition, the low country boil, which you immediately get from the Old Bay and the serving style.
Oh, yeah, instantly.
It's completely reinvented. We're talking sea vegetables, fungi, root crops, all centered around this Old Bay miso broth. It's a fascinating convergence.
It's an edible thought experiment.
Yeah.
You're taking out the shrimp, the crab, the sausage, and you're replacing it with, the texture of specialty mushrooms and the saltiness of the ocean from algae and sea asparagus.
And this is not a quick weeknight meal. Let's be clear about that. The source says it serves 4 to 6 people, requires about 30 minutes of prep.
Which feels conservative with all this chopping.
It might be. And then a full 45 minutes of very specific, timed cooking. This is a project.
My first impression was just the sheer culture shock on the page. You see kombu, this deep, quiet, savory essence of dashi.
The backbone of Japanese broth.
And right next to it in the ingredient list is 3 tablespoons of Old Bay. It's almost loud, it's aromatic, it's aggressive.
With a bold choice.
Yeah.
And a real tightrope walk to make sure one doesn't just obliterate the other. And then you see the other substitutions. King oyster mushrooms sliced up to look like scallops. And the final instruction, serve it low country style. So you dump it all out on a newspaper-lined table. The message there is, even if we change all the ingredients, the spirit of the meal, that communal, messy, hands-on ritual, that stays.
Okay, so let's get into it. Section 1 is the foundation. It's all about that broth base, the Old Bay miso fusion. If this doesn't work, the whole thing just falls apart.
It's the engine, for sure. Everything is built on this. And the initial choices for the liquid and the aromatics, they're very intentional.
It starts simple enough. 8 cups of vegetable stock, not water.
Right, and that's key. You need a baseline of savory depth, but you want a neutral one. You don't want chicken or beef flavors clashing with what's about to come. It's a blank canvas.
A savory blank canvas. Then ingo the aromatics. 1 whole head of garlic, smashed, and a 3-inch piece of ginger, sliced. Let's talk about that instruction, smashed. Why not just mince it?
That's a great question. It's a strategic choice. When you mince garlic, you rupture a lot of cell walls very quickly, and that can release some of the more aggressive sulfurous compounds.
The stuff that can get a little acrid.
Exactly. If you boil that for a long time, it can get harsh. But smashing just cracks the cloves open. It allows the allicin, the savory compounds, to infuse into the broth slowly, gently over the whole cook time. You get all the deep garlic flavor without the sharp bite.
Okay, that makes sense. And the ginger brings that clean, warm heat.
It's a classic base for so many Asian broths, so you're already setting this warm, savory, pungent stage. And then comes the American anchor.
3 tablespoons of Old Bay seasoning, plus more for later. That feels like a lot. Is there a danger it just completely steamrolls the delicate flavors we're supposed to be building?
That is the risk. That's the tightrope. But you have to remember what Old Bay is. It's not one note. It's an 18-spice blend. You've got celery salt, black pepper, red pepper, paprika.
Bay leaf mustard.
All of it. It has this incredible complexity, so it's got these sharp, peppery, high-frequency notes, and that's what allows it to stand next to the deep, low-frequency base notes of umami from the miso and kombu. They operate in different registers.
That's a great way to think about it. High-frequency spice versus low-frequency umami. And I guess you need that much of it to punch through the butter and the starchy vegetables that are coming later.
Precisely. And the recipe is smart. It backs up the Old Bay with 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika.
Which is a really interesting little detail.
It's a critical nuance. Old Bay has paprika, but it's not smoked. In a traditional boil, you get the smoky depth from the andouille sausage or maybe from the shells of the shrimp and crab cooking.
You're getting it from the animal products.
Right. Since you don't have that here, the smoked paprika is the stand-in. It's an elegant substitution that adds this earthy, almost barbecued depth that keeps the broth from tasting thin.
Okay, and this is where the technique gets really clever for me. The citrus. Squeeze the juice of 2 lemons? Fine. But then it says to drop the rinds into the pot. Most people would just throw those away.
And that would be a huge mistake here. Lemon juice gives you acidity, brightness, but that's a very volatile flavor. It can grab off pretty easily.
It disappears.
Yeah. The rinds, though, they hold all the essential citrus oils. And as they simmer in that hot broth, they release those oils slowly. It's a much deeper, more complex, slightly bittersweet citrus flavor. And those oils are fat-soluble.
Ah, so they're going to bind with the butter that we add later on.
Exactly. It creates this background note of citrus that lasts through the whole cook. Instead of just a quick hit of acidity at the beginning, it's what cuts through the richness.
So we've got the stock, the aromatics, the big spice blend, and the lemon rinds. The last step in this first stage is the infusion process. Bring to a boil, then simmer for 15 minutes before anything else goes in.
And you cannot skip this step. This 15 minutes is everything. It's where all those flavors marry, the fat-soluble compounds from the spices, the oils from the rinds, the pungency from the ginger and garlic. It all has to come together.
Because if you throw the potatoes in right away, they're just going to soak up a weak, undeveloped broth.
An immature broth, exactly. You need to let it become this robust, intense liquid first. That 15-minute investment pays off in every single bite of the final dish.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
The broth has to be ready to do the heavy lifting. So now we move into section 2. We're building the actual meal, and it's all about the strategy of timing, the hard boil.
Right. Contrast is everything in a dish like this. You need soft next to firm, crunchy next to silky. So we start with the things that take the longest to cook, the densest components. We're talking 10 to 12 minutes.
And first up are the starches, the stand-ins for the classic new potatoes. The recipe gives you a choice, taro or purple sweet potato.
And that choice really changes the final dish in a fascinating way.
How so?
Well, taro is much denser, earthier. It's high in a starch called amylose, so when you cook it, it holds its shape really well. It can even get a little bit sticky or slimy in a pleasant way. It soaks up the broth but stays firm.
And the sweet potato is the opposite.
Almost.
Yeah.
A purple sweet potato is much creamier, softer. It has more natural sugar, which creates this amazing sweet and spicy contrast with the Old Bay. It will break down a little more, maybe thicken the broth slightly. The key for both is the instruction, and cook until just starting to get tender.
Not mushy.
Never wishy. They'll keep cooking a bit from the residual heat.
Okay, and then we have the lotus root, one large root sliced into rounds. This is such a brilliant addition.
It's there for 2 reasons. First, the visuals. That wagon wheel pattern is just stunning, and it really reinforces the Asian influence. But more importantly, it's for texture.
The crunch.
The persistent crunch. Lotus root is mostly fiber and water, and it just does not get soft. After 12 minutes in boiling liquid, it still has a fantastic snap to it. You absolutely need that to cut through all the other softer textures in the pot.
So after those dense vegetables get their 10-minute head start, we move to the fungi as the catch. This is the real substitution workhorse, and it only needs 5 to 7 minutes.
This is the argument for the whole dish, right here. It starts with king oyster mushrooms, 4 large ones sliced into thick scallop rounds. This mushroom is the MVP of texture. Its stem is so dense and meaty.
And the recipe has a very specific instruction. Score it crosswise on both sides. That's not just for looks, is it?
No, not at all. It's a classic technique, and it does 3 things. First, it massively increases the surface area so it can soak up more of that amazing broth.
Like a sponge.
Exactly. Second, it helps with the texture. When you bite into it, it yields a little bit. It flakes almost more like a cooked scallop and less like a rubbery chunk of mushroom.
It's a texture hack.
It's a total texture hack. And third, it just looks the part.
So you have your scallops, and then for the crab meat, we have lion's mane or oyster mushrooms torn into clusters.
Right. The goal here is a shaggy, fibrous texture. Lion's mane is perfect for this. When you tear it, it pulls apart into these delicate, feathery strands that are shockingly similar to pulled crab meat.
And oyster mushrooms are a bit more stringy.
A little more robust, yeah. But tearing them, not slicing, is the key. You're enhancing that natural fibrous quality that mimics seafood.
And this is when the actual algae backbone goes in. 2 large sheets of kombu right alongside the mushrooms.
The kombu is pure foundational umami. It's loaded with glutamic acid. Over these 5-7 minutes, it softens enough to be edible, but its main job is to just melt its savory, mineral, deep ocean flavor into the broth. It adds a layer of complexity that's different from the miso we'll add later. It makes the broth taste like it's been simmering for hours.
Okay, so the foundation is laid, roots are tender, fungi are soaking up all that spicy goodness. We're at section 3, the final additions. Soft greens, salinity, and the critical step, emulsion.
Right. This is the grand finale of the cooking process. You add these things last because they cook fast. You don't want the miso boiling for an hour, and you definitely don't want the greens to turn into mush.
So in go 3 tablespoons of white miso paste and a half a cup of vegan butter or ghee. That is a serious amount of fat.
It is, but it's essential. Think about a traditional boil. It's rich. It's luxurious. That comes from the fat in the sausage or from adding a ton of butter for dipping. Fat is a flavor carrier. All those delicious compounds in the Old Bay are fat-soluble. The butter is what makes them cling to the vegetables and coat your mouth.
It's for the mouthfeel.
It's totally for the mouthfeel, and it starts to emulsify the broth, making it creamy and rich instead of just a thin, watery liquid.
And the miso paste. The recipe is specific. White miso. Shiro miso. Why that? And why the instruction to dissolve it in a ladle of broth first?
Okay, so the type of miso is critical. If you used a red miso, an aka miso, which is fermented for much longer, it would be too strong. It's intensely salty and earthy, and it would just get in a fight with the Old Bay.
And probably win.
White miso is milder, sweeter. It adds that beautiful fermented umami depth without completely taking over the dish. It plays well with others.
And the dissolving technique.
Miso is a thick paste. If you just drop a cold lump of it into a hot pot, it seizes up. You get these little clumps that never break down. So you temper it. You whisk it into a small amount of the hot broth in a ladle first until it's a smooth liquid, and then you stir that back into the main pot. Perfect. Even distribution every time. Such a simple step that makes all the difference. Okay, so the broth is now rich and creamy. We add the quick cook vegetables, just 2 to 3 minutes, bamboo shoots,
For a nice, firm, earthy crunch.
and baby bok choy, or choy sum. The goal is bright green and crisp tender.
Yes. They're there for freshness. They should wilt slightly, but still have a watery snap. It's a necessary contrast to all the rich, dense things in the pot. A moment of lightness.
And now for maybe my favorite ingredient in this whole recipe, samphire. Sea asparagus.
It's a genius move, truly.
What exactly is it doing here?
Samphire is a halophyte. It's a plant that grows in salt marshes, so it naturally absorbs a ton of salinity from its environment. It's crisp, it's snappy, and it tastes, well, it tastes of the ocean.
So it's adding a natural saltiness.
It's the natural finishing salt. But more than that, it's replacing the specific kind of salinity you lose when you take out the shrimp and crab. It's that clean, fresh, oceanic brine, and it brings this incredible crunchy texture. It's doing 2 jobs at once.
That is so smart. Okay, and finally, a cup of dried wakame goes in with the greens.
And the transformation is immediate. It goes from these brittle little flakes to silky, tender, deep green leaves in just a couple of minutes. It adds a soft, slippery texture that's a perfect counterpoint to the crisp bok choy and the snappy samphire.
Yeah. Okay, so everything is cooked. That brings us to section 4, the delicate finish and the all-important low country presentation.
This is where you have to be careful. It's all about the most delicate ingredient, the sea grapes or umiburo, and the recipe has a warning in bold letters.
Turn off the heat. Do not cook them. Why are they so fragile?
It's all about turgor pressure. Sea grapes are these tiny little spheres filled with seawater. That's what gives them their signature pop, like caviar. Heat causes the water inside to expand and burst the cell walls. They just deflate.
So they go from popping caviar to sad, flabby seaweed.
Instantly. They're ruined. So you rinse them in cold water, you set them aside, and they only go on at the very, very end as a garnish. They are a burst of cold, salty freshness against the hot, rich boil. It's all about that final contrast.
I love that. So now for the serving ritual. This is where the fusion really comes home. Serve low country style.
This is the cultural context of the whole meal. A low country boil is communal, it's informal, it's messy, and the recipe honors that. It says to either drain the liquid, but save it.
Yes, you can't throw that broth away.
After all that work, it would be a crime. That Old Bay miso broth is liquid gold. It's a dipping soup, a consommé for another day. So you drain it off, or use a slotted spoon and you get everything out of the pot.
And then you pile it all onto a newspaper-lined table or a large platter. It's so rustic for such a conceptually sophisticated dish.
That's the point, I think. The newspaper is a great equalizer. It says, don't be precious about this, get your hands dirty, have fun. It unites the Japanese umami and the American spice under this banner of just, shared joy.
And the final flourish. Top the pile with the fresh sea grapes, and then a final dusting of more Old Bay and some fresh lemon wedges.
And that's the full circle moment. The first thing you smell and taste is that classic Old Bay. The final squeeze of lemon cuts through the richness. The cold sea grapes pop in your mouth. All the textures and flavors united right there on the table.
It sounds incredible. Okay, but there's more. Section 5, the flavor extensions, dipping sauces. The boil itself sounds so intensely flavored. Why do we even need sauces?
I think it's about customization. It lets each person tailor their own experience, and it provides these little high-intensity flavor bombs for the things that can handle it, like the mushrooms and the taro. You get two options, one classic, one fusion.
Sauce 1 is the classic, lemon garlic butter. Just melted vegan butter, minced garlic, parsley.
That's the direct nod to the traditional seafood boil. It's just pure amplified richness. It's heavy, it's comforting, it's exactly what you want to dip a big piece of king oyster mushroom into. Pure indulgence.
And then sauce 2 is the complex fusion. Spicy miso mayo.
And this one is the modern twist. We're taking the miso element from the broth and putting it into a new context. You whisk it with mayonnaise for a cool, creamy richness, and sriracha for a big kick of heat.
So you have umami, creaminess, and heat all in one.
Right. And dipping something like the shredded lion's mane into that, it gives that substitute crab meat the punch and richness it needs to really feel substantial. It's brilliant. It caters to the traditionalist and the modernist at the same table.
This has been such a fascinating breakdown. It's not just a recipe, it's a whole culinary philosophy. So before we wrap up, let's recap the big takeaways here. What are the major lessons from this source?
I think the first one for me is the idea of texture mapping. The success of the dish is completely dependent on that precise timing.
The 10-12 minutes for the roots, 5-7 for the fungi.
2 to 3 for the greens, and 0 for the sea grapes. Every single component is cooked to its perfect texture, and that creates a dynamic experience in every bite. It's not just a homogeneous stew.
Right. The second big lesson has to be the flavor alchemy. The way it successfully marries that loud American spice with the deep, quiet Japanese umami.
It proves that these two huge flavor profiles don't have to clash. The miso and kombu provide this incredible savory foundation that allows the bright, peppery Old Bay to shine without being overpowering. The whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts.
And the third lesson, which I think is so exciting, is the substitution success. This recipe is a blueprint for how to do plant-based mimicry right.
It is. It shows you that by focusing on the texture and the maritime essence, using things like king oyster mushrooms, crispy samphire, poppin' sea grapes, you can convincingly replicate the sensory experience of a seafood boil without any seafood. It's about sensory replication, not just flavor replacement.
So we've broken down this incredible recipe that bridges Maryland and Japan. What's the final thought for you, our listener, to take away from all this?
Well, given how successful this algae and fungi substitution was, how it kept the spirit of the dish alive, the final provocative thought is this: what other dishes could this apply to?
You mean taking the same strategy to other classics?
Exactly. Think about a Spanish paella, which is all about the saffron-infused rice and that crispy socarrat at the bottom. Or a Louisiana gumbo, defined by its dark roux and the holy trinity of vegetables. We think of them as seafood or sausage dishes.
But are they?
Right. Could you completely reinvent them? Could you swap out the traditional proteins for carefully chosen plant-based textures? Maybe something like dense plantains for sausage or other sea vegetables for shellfish, while being absolutely rigid about preserving the traditional spice base and the cooking ritual.
Because what this Old Bay miso boil proves is that the soul of a dish might live more in its spices, its textures, and its communal ritual than in the specific protein we've always assumed was essential.
It's a lot to think about, a lot to chew on.
It certainly is. Thank you for sharing this phenomenal culinary blueprint with us today.
My pleasure. This was a delicious deep dive.